Hey guys, this is Chad with Take One Film and Video here in Nashville, Tennessee. Thanks for joining us back here for this different sort of video. This might be a little bit longer, so hopefully you guys will stay with us. But I think that I'm going to be able to give you great information to be able to help you decide what camera really fits what we're doing. Whether you're in a church, a studio, there's a lot of options, and there's a wide range of pricing from $5,000 to $50,000, and it can be really overwhelming and confusing. And so what I want to do today is talk about these three tiers of cameras, I'm going to call them. We have the compact, the broadcast, and the cinema camera, and we're going to talk about really what's the right fit. Do I really need to spend more money, or can I get away with a cheaper camera? Well, let's talk about that. And first of all, I'm going to just mention that all of these are from our friends at Panasonic. These are great cameras, but this is not specific to Panasonic. The other major manufacturers all have their versions of these tiers of cameras. So we're using Panasonic as our example today, but if you have a different manufacturer that you like, this video is going to apply to that as well. So let's start with the compact. This is a very popular camera because it's an all-in-one. It has everything that you need, and it's definitely going to be on the lower end of the price range. So who's this camera for? And I think there's a couple things to consider. First of all, if you are starting out in a situation where that you don't have a lot of experienced personnel, or maybe you just have very limited volunteers, operators, whatever it may be, if you have severe limitations, this might be a camera that you want to consider. One of the features of this camera is that it does a lot of things automatically. It isn't all-in-one, so it doesn't have any type of external paint controls, lens controls. In fact, the lens, it's an all-in-one, so the lens is built in. So it's a great option for someone that has operators with maybe limited skill. This is also going to be your option if you are on a very tight and limited budget. This is probably going to fit the job. Now, is this a good looking camera? Now, that's a relative question, but the answer that I'm going to give you out of my opinion is yes. All of these are good looking cameras, but there is quality issues that we're going to get into. First of all, being an all-in-one camera, you have a built-in lens that's, depending on which manufacturer you use, can be anywhere between an 18 by zoom to a 22 by zoom, and you kind of get what you get. So if you zoom all the way in without using a digital extender or anything like that, which I don't recommend, that's pretty much the limitation of this camera. So you got to be thinking about how far is the distance between, say, our pulpit and where the camera stands are. So if you are anything over, say, 50, 60 feet, you may want to really consider that this might not be able to get the tight shot that you're really looking for, especially if you want to frame something that's going to be tight. You're going to be limited. You're going to want this camera to be in closer proximity to what you're shooting. So that's number one. The other thing is that you may need to add some accessories. It does have a built-in viewfinder, and it has a quarter 20 mount, so you can add an additional mount and things like that. But aside from that, you have a smaller sensors, and that's the other thing I want to get into. Between all these cameras is the sensor. The sensor size is going to be very important because the bigger the sensor, bigger is really better when it comes to sensors. And the reason is because the more area that each pixel of a sensor has, the more photons of light that you'll be able to receive on that. You're gonna have better low light capabilities, so your camera will respond better in low lights, and it's going to do that with reduced noise. Sometimes a lot of these smaller sensors, even though they might be HD or 4K, the actual pixel sizes are really, really small. So there's only physically so much that we can get out of current technology with a small pixel size. So again, having low light with reduced noise, because sometimes these cameras have to actually boost, electronically boost or gain the video to be able to get to a usable level. And the other thing is just dynamic range, because as we mentioned, the more surface area that you have on each pixel of a sensor, the more information that you're going to get, more photons of light are hitting it, and you're going to get a better quality image. And sometimes that comes in dynamic range. Dynamic range is the easiest way I can describe that is if you have darker areas and blacks and grays, and the more dynamic range you have, the more detail that you're going to be able to see in those darker levels. And you're going to have a little bit more fidelity, and it's just going to be more of a natural image. And it's just going to continue to increase the quality of the picture by having bigger sensors. So that really is the big option, or the big advantage, of having larger sensors. But again, these compact cameras are going to be limited to that size. So that's just something to be thinking about when we talk about quality. yes, it's relatively a good picture, but you're not going to get that quality. And the other thing, when it comes to the sensors and the lenses, being an all-in-one and being a small sensor is depth of field. That's going to be a big issue, especially when we get into the cinema cameras in a few minutes. The depth of field is how much you see in focus behind or out of focus to give you that real sort of cinematic, shallow depth of field that is really popular now in a lot of church services and a lot of videos. So people want that real cinematic look. This camera is probably not going to give you that to the degree that you might have, thought about in your head. So it's something to really consider. If that's a priority, this camera is going to be very limited on how much depth of field, sometimes really, if all, that you're going to be able to get out of this camera. The other thing is going to be control. So you can set this camera up and you can match the settings between other cameras, but there's no external control. So all the control happens in the menu of the camera, and you can white balance, black balance, and do the basic operation. But if you plug in all the same settings and you work and you have someone that can tech the cameras together, you can get them matching maybe 85–90%. They're going to be really close, and they may be completely acceptable for the level of production that you're doing. But again, if there is something that's off, there is no external control. There's no video shader. There's no one to really be able to make those fine adjustments. It's something that you'll have to do either in post or go back and correct the cameras later. So that's certainly something that you can consider. But again, if you don't have a lot of volunteer help and you're very limited on personnel, this actually might be an advantage, because the broadcast camera that we're going to talk to about next requires that extra level of expertise. So let's get into this. This is the Panasonic HC3900. It is an HD/4K broadcast camera. And when I say broadcast camera, what I mean, there's a couple things that I consider a broadcast camera. The first of all, being a 2/3 inch lens mount. To me, that is absolutely necessary to have a quote broadcast camera. So this is a standard 17 by lens, and right here is a detachable mount, 2/3 inch bayonet. It is a universal standard in broadcast cameras, and you can go to any manufacturer, anything that is broadcast is going to have a 2/3 inch mount. The big advantage, two things really. First of all, a 2/3 inch imager size is going to give you the next step up from where the compact is. A little bit bigger imager, you're going to get some of those better qualities back into your quality of your video, more dynamic range, better low light, all of those things. But the biggest advantage that we're moving into in this camera is the lens options. That's a huge thing, because this camera can be configured with everything from a wide angle lens to this standard 17 by, or you can put the big sports telescopic lenses. And there's a lot of churches that have big sanctuaries or arenas and so forth, where your camera position is going to be over 100 feet, maybe even 200 feet away from your pastor or whoever you're shooting. So to be able to get that tight shot, you have to get bigger lenses. The big drawback to that is that those lenses can become exponentially more expensive. They get really, really expensive, especially if you're in the 4K world. Expect to pay up to 6 figures for some of those big sports glasses, and even beyond that. I mean, it's a big undertaking, but sometimes that does fit the job. Now, these cameras have a lot more going for them when it comes to control, but I'm going to start by saying one of the limitations that I would say for everyone that's considering, I want to be in broadcast camera world, it's going to be that you need someone that's going to have the experience in operating these cameras. So whereas the compact just takes one person to operate, this essentially takes two. You have your camera operator and you have a video shader who actually controls the iris, controls the video, the gains, the blacks, shutters, gammas, knees, all of the more advanced video features that will help you do a couple things. First of all, it'll help you get consistent video between all your cameras. All your cameras can consistently match, and the video operator actually runs the iris with this stick right here, and he can make adjustments based on light level, any conditions, anything that changes depending on the angle of the camera or the position. He can make changes on the fly, real time, making this adjustment. Also color balances, he can do all of that, and he'll have one of these RCPs or ROPs for every camera that they have. So that adds an additional control layer. So all the camera operator has to do is to basically zoom and focus the camera. The other thing that makes this a broadcast camera, if you look on the back here, we've got, this is a SMPTE hybrid fiber connection. There's 2 fibers and power. So this camera is connected via 1 cable to the CCU unit, and the CCU unit does quite a few things. It does, first of all, it provides power to the camera and signal. So you would put the CCU in your control room near your switcher or wherever your central operation is. This will give you your camera output. It'll take a return video so that your camera operator can actually see what's on program or any other feed that you have. It also takes care of your tally. So whatever switcher that you're using, you can interface your tally to this so that when you go live on air, your viewfinder, which by the way, this is an example of a viewfinder. This is a 7-inch. By the way, you can get 9-inch different other viewfinders for this, but again, just a quick mention, professional viewfinder, lots of options for focus, peaking, really helps your operator nail their focus. This slides in here. As you can see, you got a big square here that lights up for tally. So that again is another advantage for the CCU. One of the other things too that creates this sort of broadcast workflow is communication. Intercom is a big thing. These are typically compatible with all your major brands, RTS, Clearcom, Riedel. You should be able to use anything that you need through the CCU. And they typically accommodate that. All your operator has to do is plug a headset into the back of the camera and they can talk. And depending on the camera, there's lots of controls back there for them to be able to talk back to the control room or engineering. And so those are all of the things that typically encompass any broadcast style camera. Now, again, it takes a more skilled operator, but the advantage to that is, depending on the type of productions that you're doing, you can hire any professional freelance camera operator, and this is the camera that they're going to be comfortable with. The rear controls for the lens, depending on which ones they are, they're going to be right at home. These are the ones that they're going to be using in their jobs every day. So if you want a true broadcast setup, this is really where you need to be. 2 3/8-inch lenses, SMPTE, or sometimes you see older cameras with triacs, real viewfinders, and a video shading control to be able to operate your camera remotely. So again, the big limitations of these are cost, because these do get more expensive. And again, sometimes the lenses can actually be more than the cameras. So this is one of those things where you still have to determine what your distance is from your camera, just like we do with the compact, but we use a little bit more math, because the great thing about this one is this one's is going to have a hard limitation. This camera you can put anywhere as long as you have a lens that's going to be long enough to be able to connect with what you're wanting to shoot. So we have options to configure this to basically meet almost any need that you have, but cost is an option. And again, depth of field is improved, but it's not going to be as great as it is with our cinema camera. So I'm going to pull this over here. This is the Panasonic Varicam LT. I'm going to swap this out for a minute. So this camera is kind of interesting because it adds a lot, and it also adds some additional challenges as well that I'd like to talk about. So this is the camera that you want if your number one priority is, I want the cinema look. I want it to look like a high-end film cinema type of production. I want this to look like the biggest churches on YouTube right now, or anything that I've seen. This style of camera is where you need to be. This is the style of camera. In fact, a lot of those big mega churches that do the really creative praise and worship type of things, and not to name the names, but you all know who I'm talking about. A lot of those churches actually use this camera, and there's some others like it, of course, from Sony and others. But what this gives you is the big 35 millimeter cinema look. What it also brings you are some real technical challenges, because these camera bodies are really built for film production, where you have a camera operator, an AC, you have a lighting grip, you have very controlled environments, because there's a lot of things here that need to be set up, that need to be manually controlled, and they're not designed to be multi-camera setups like we have with our broadcast. However, the manufacturers have heard the demand for that look through multi-camera situations have been increased. So now these cameras are being adapted so that they can work in those multi-cam environments. So what is it that you need to consider if that's something that you think, yes, I want that cinema look, I want to know how to get there, I want to bring that into my church or studio? Well, a couple of things that you're going to have to think about. First of all, when it comes to images, to lens and sensors, you're going to have the best sensors. All these cameras either come with 35 millimeter sensors, to 1-inch sensors, to full frame sensors. These are going to have the biggest sensors on the market. So when it comes to the best quality, the best low light, dynamic range, low noise, this is the camera. But you also have to couple these with lenses, whereas our broadcast lenses, I said, can be really expensive. These can even go even more expensive depending on what you want. The one thing that I always recommend if you're wanting to be in a broadcast workflow with the cinema camera is to use the Cabrio lenses made by Fuji, and Canon has a version as well, but there are a very limited amount of these lenses that actually have the servo controls. If you see here on our broadcast lens, this housing here has broadcast servo controls, and what that means is that it operates the iris, it operates the zoom, and in a lot of cases it operates the focus, and it will do it and connect with broadcast style controllers. The Fujinon Cabrios and the Canons as well will operate that way as well, but you have just a few different lenses that you can choose from. They are PL mounted, and these cameras typically come in PL or EF mount, and they're compatible with pretty much almost all of your major, Canon mounted 35 millimeter lenses and any PL Cinema 35 millimeter lens. But you can put the Cabrios, which are 35 millimeter mounts, PL, but they have the broadcast servo control, so that if you do have freelance operators, if you do have staff that come from the broadcast world, I strongly recommend you go that route, because they're still going to be able to operate and give that same type of workflow that you have in broadcast, but they'll do it with a cinema look. Outside of that, you're going to have to choose whether you want cinema prime lenses which don't have zoom, zoom lenses that require some rods and additional accessories and follow focuses, and there's a lot of add-ons that not only bring complexity to operating the camera, but it also adds cost. So if you look at just the price of one of these bodies, sometimes you say, wow, that's not that bad. That's actually cheaper than the broadcast camera. But once you start adding the converters for the multicam in the back, the lenses on the front, the accessories to do it, all of these things I have on this camera, the handles to operate it, the sleds, these are all a la carte add-ons that will just continue to bring up your price on these cameras. And to do that, so there is even adapters on the back which will adapt these cameras to the broadcast SMPTE fiber type of setup that we have here on these broadcast cameras. But again, adds additional cost, but what that does do is allow you to once again bring in a video shader who can use an ROP or RCP very similar to this one. And again, depending on the lens, can operate the iris. Again, this will work on the Cabrios. Outside of that, there's very limited amount of lenses for cinema that can operate here. But at least you can still control the cameras, white balances, shutters, all of those things from this position if you have the broadcast adapter. But again, you still have to add your viewfinders. These typically don't come with broadcast viewfinders like this. You have to add those on there. So again, this will give you that great look that you're looking for. And I really don't want to be discouraging or sound discouraging, because these cameras look amazing. These cameras are going to create a great image, but it's going to be a lot of money. And I think that that's important to know up front, that this is going to be a huge investment. And it is also not the type of setup that you want if you have very limited skill sets in your volunteer team or in your hired freelance team. It's also going to be not something that you're going to have to do if you have a very limited number of people. This camera does take a lot of work to get set up, but once you do it, there's nothing that looks like it. So this really is a great overview of how there are multiple options, but there's still a lot of things that you can come up with and questions. Maybe you're somewhere in between. This is why we love to work with you, to help you sort out a lot of those problems and help answer a lot of those questions. So if you have any questions about choosing between any of these three cameras, and you want someone to really just kind of help you walk that through to make sure that you are on the right path and make sure that you are being good stewards with the money that you have to spend, then call us and let us work with you and help you through this process. Our number is 1-877-81-TAKE-1. You can also reach out to us via email at mail@takeone.tv. Well, thank you for hanging with us on this longer video. If you like this, give us a thumbs up, subscribe, and we hope to hear from you soon. Thank you so much.